Special Envoy Kalen Vance, a human diplomat whose quick wit often got him into, and occasionally out of, trouble, felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He wasn't usually nervous. Back on Earth, navigating the intricate dance of political banquets was like breathing, but here, on the vibrant, multi-limbed alien world of Xylos, every breath felt heavy with consequence. He was the human face of a crucial negotiation, tasked with forging a trade alliance with the powerful Cathar Imperium. Humanity desperately needed their rare vibranium deposits for new energy solutions, and the Cathar, in turn, coveted Earth's advanced medical technology. The air in the grand echoing hall was thick with the scent of alien flora and the low hum of thousands of Cathar voices, a sound that always reminded Kalen of a distant, buzzing beehive. Tonight was the final banquet, the supposed culmination of weeks of complex, often bewildering discussions. Kalen had spent hours rehearsing his closing address, a carefully crafted speech meant to be both respectful and subtly persuasive, peppered with gestures he believed were universally understood as goodwill. He'd even practiced the traditional Cathar feathered palm greeting, a delicate flick of the wrist that, if done incorrectly, could signify anything from profound insult to a request for a wrestling match. As the evening progressed, the Cathar servers, towering figures with multiple grasping limbs, continually refilled his chalice with the potent Xylosian fermented beverage. Kalen, ever keen to immerse himself in local customs, had partaken enthusiastically, perhaps a little too enthusiastically. The liquid, thick and iridescent, warmed him from the inside out, blurring the sharp edges of his anxiety. Now it was his turn to speak. He rose, feeling a confident sway that he hoped appeared regal. He began his speech, his voice resonating through the hall, translated simultaneously by his embedded comlink. He spoke of cooperation, of shared futures, of the vast potential between their two peoples. Then came the moment for the symbolic gesture. He reached into his tunic, pulling out a small, intricately carved jade pendant, a traditional earth gift signifying respect and enduring friendship. He extended it towards Princess Lyra, the Cathar heir, who sat at the head table, her many eyes fixed upon him. Her scales shimmered under the crystalline lights, a dazzling display of reds and greens. Kalen, remembering his cultural briefing, then performed what he thought was the gesture of binding trust, a slow, deliberate offering with the pendant held high. He'd practiced it tirelessly, but as the words from the comlink echoed in the hall, conveying his actions to the Cathar, a ripple went through the assembled crowd. It wasn't the gentle murmur of approval he expected. Instead, the low hum began to rise, turning into a crescendo of excited chirps and trills. Princess Lyra's many limbs, usually held with serene grace, suddenly moved in a flurry of intricate gestures. Her eyes, which had been solemn, now shone with an intense, almost overwhelming joy. A wide, toothy grin spread across her reptilian face, a sight Kalen hadn't seen before, and it looked less like a smile of delight and more like one of fierce, predatory satisfaction. Before Kalen could even begin to process the sudden shift in atmosphere, before he could question why his carefully planned gesture had evoked such an extreme reaction, Princess Lyra, with an emphatic, sweeping motion of all her limbs, let out a piercing, triumphant cry that echoed through the vast hall. Y-E-S-E. The entire assembly erupted. Kalen watched, frozen, as the Cathar guests around them began to ululate, a sound of profound celebration that shook the very foundations of the hall. He saw other Cathar dignitaries rushing forward, offering elaborate bows and congratulatory chirps to Princess Lyra. Confusion surged through Kalen, quickly followed by a cold, dreadful realization. He replayed the scene in his mind, the gestures, the words, the sudden shift. He had, with his limited understanding of Cathar etiquette and the unfortunate boost from the Xylosian beverage, misread every single cue. The gesture of binding trust was not, in fact, a gesture of friendship. In Cathar culture, performed with a token of value and direct eye contact towards an eligible heir, it was the single most sacred and undeniable act of a formal marriage proposal. And Princess Lyra, with all the joyful conviction of a bride-to-be, had just accepted it. Kalen's stomach plummeted. He hadn't meant to propose to the alien princess, but she had said yes, and the Cathar, known for their unwavering adherence to tradition, were already celebrating his impending nuptials. His diplomatic mission had just taken a very, very unexpected turn. Special Envoy Kalen Vance awoke with a jolt, his head throbbing with a rhythm that felt entirely too alien, even for Xylos. The opulent Cathar guest chamber, with its shimmering bioluminescent walls, spun gently around him. Then, like a sudden, icy plunge into a deep pool, the memory of the previous night crashed over him. The banquet, the potent Xylosian beverage, the jade pendant, the gesture of binding trust, and Princess Lyra's resounding yes. He wasn't just hungover. He was impossibly engaged to an alien princess. He scrambled out of the plush, multi-layered sleeping nest, his human diplomatic uniform feeling suddenly too tight, too formal, too wrong. He immediately contacted his lead aide, Commander Ava Rostova, on a secure channel, his voice a frantic whisper. "Eva, you won't believe what happened. There's been a misunderstanding. A colossal one." Ava's calm, professional voice replied, "Envoy, the Cathar Imperial Court has already issued a formal announcement this morning. Congratulations on your impending nuptials. It seems to have significantly expedited the trade agreement." Kalen stared at the ceiling, aghast. "Expedited? Eva, I didn't mean to propose. It was a cultural misinterpretation. A gesture of goodwill, that's all." Eva sighed, a sound that conveyed both sympathy and exasperation. "Sir, in Cathar culture, a public proposal, once accepted, is not merely a suggestion. It is a sacred, legally binding covenant. To retract it would be an unforgivable insult, a diplomatic catastrophe that could shatter the alliance and potentially lead to, well, let's just say very uncomfortable interstellar relations." The weight of her words settled on him, cold and heavy. He wasn't just embarrassed. He was a potential catalyst for interspecies conflict. Later that morning, Kalen was escorted, with an almost celebratory pomp, to Princess Lyra's private chambers. He braced himself for an awkward, perhaps even angry, confrontation. Instead, Lyra greeted him with a curious, almost amused glint in her many eyes. Her scales, usually a vibrant red, were now a soft, iridescent green, a color he later learned signified contentment in Cathar. "Envoy Vance," she purred, her voice a series of melodic clicks and whistles that his translator rendered perfectly. "I confess your method was unconventional. but not unwelcome. Kalen launched into a desperate explanation, detailing the human custom of gift-giving, the innocent intent of his gesture, the linguistic nuances lost in translation. Lyra listened patiently, her head tilted, her multiple limbs occasionally shifting in what seemed to be a gesture of deep thought. When he finished, breathless, she simply chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Human, your customs are indeed peculiar, but the outcome for the Cathar Imperium is most auspicious. This union, however it came to be, strengthens our position, secures our future, and," she added, a hint of something unreadable in her gaze, "it solves certain internal challenges." Kalen felt a chill. She wasn't just accepting it, she was using it. He was a pawn, albeit a very confused one, in a game he didn't understand. From that moment, Cullen's life on Xylos transformed from diplomatic negotiations to a dizzying, bewildering whirlwind of prenuptial traditions. He was subjected to a bonding ritual of shared essence, which involved sitting motionless for hours while Cathar shamans chanted and wafted pungent, hallucinogenic incense around him, supposedly aligning his spirit with Lyra's. Then came the exchange of genetic compatibility samples, a far more invasive procedure than he'd anticipated, involving complex bioscans and the collection of various bodily fluids, all performed with a solemnity that made him deeply uncomfortable. He was paraded through the Cathar capital in an open hover carriage, forced to wave to cheering crowds of multi-limbed aliens who seemed genuinely thrilled by the sight of their future human consort. Every meal became a lesson in Cathar courtship etiquette, every conversation a minefield of potential misinterpretations. He ate strange, pulsating foods, participated in elaborate multi-day feasts, and learned to navigate the labyrinthine social hierarchy of the Cathar court, all while trying to maintain the facade of a man deeply in love, rather than one trapped by a linguistic accident. Yet, amidst the chaos, Kalen began to truly observe Princess Lyra. He saw her not just as the alien princess he was accidentally engaged to, but as a complex individual. She was indeed a brilliant xenobotanist, spending hours in the Imperium's sprawling, bioluminescent gardens, meticulously studying new plant life. He witnessed her shrewdness during council meetings, how she deftly navigated political traps set by her rivals, her many eyes missing nothing. She was a leader, strong and intelligent, clearly destined for the throne. He also began to sense the internal challenges she had hinted at. There were whispers, subtle glances, and a palpable tension. Whenever her ambitious cousin, Thrak, entered a room, Thrak, a formidable warrior with obsidian scales and a perpetually scowling face, seemed to view Kalen with open disdain, his multiple limbs often twitching with barely suppressed aggression. He represented a powerful conservative faction within the Imperium, one that clung fiercely to ancient traditions and viewed any external influence, especially from a species as young and unpredictable as humans, with deep suspicion. Kalen started to realize that his accidental engagement wasn't just a personal ordeal. It was a pivotal chess piece in a high-stakes power struggle within the Cathar Imperium itself. His presence, however unintended, had upset a delicate balance. The trade alliance, humanity's desperate need for vibranium, and Lyra's claim to the throne were all now intricately tied to his bizarre accidental betrothal. The weight of an empire and the fate of two species now rested on the shoulders of a human diplomat who just wanted to go home. The celebrations continued, but beneath the joyous ululations, Kalen could feel the cold, calculating eyes of Lyra's enemies watching him, waiting for him to make another mistake. The suspense was a constant, knowing presence. Special Envoy Kalen Vance, now officially consort-elect to Princess Lyra, found his days a bewildering blend of forced celebration and intense observation. The initial shock of his accidental engagement had begun to wear off, replaced by a keen, almost desperate, need to understand the intricate political currents swirling around him. He continued to participate in the endless pre-nuptial rituals, the feast of shared breath, where he had to inhale the exhalations of dozens of Kanthar elders, the dance of harmonious limbs, a graceful, multi-person choreography that left him feeling like a tangled knot, and the ceremony of ancestral progeny, which involved elaborate holographic projections of Lyra's lineage stretching back millennia. Each event was a public display of unity, yet beneath the surface, Kalen sensed a growing chill. Not all Cathar looked upon his union with joy. He noticed the stiff, almost hostile postures of certain high-ranking officials whenever he entered a room. Their multifaceted eyes, usually expressive, would narrow to unreadable slits. Their chirps of greeting, while outwardly polite, often carried an underlying tone that his translator couldn't quite decipher, but which felt distinctly unwelcoming. The most prominent source of this dissent was, without a doubt, Thrak, Lyra's cousin, a formidable Cathar warrior, and a leader of the conservative faction, made no secret of his disdain for Kalen. Thrak's obsidian scales seemed to absorb all light, making him appear even more menacing. His gaze, when it fell upon Kalen, felt like a physical weight, heavy with suspicion and thinly veiled contempt. During a formal luncheon, Thrak had deliberately turned his back on Kalen when the human attempted a polite conversational opening, a blatant snub that sent a ripple of discomfort through the other guests. Later, during a tour of the Cathar military academies, Thrak had made pointed remarks about the fragility of non-scaled species and the untested loyalties of those. From outside the Imperium, his words clearly aimed at Kalen. The conservative faction, Kalen learned from his increasingly nervous aide. Eva believed fiercely in the purity of Cathar bloodlines and traditions. They saw the human Cathar alliance, and especially Kalen's engagement to Lyra, as a dangerous dilution of their culture, a sign of weakness that would invite external influence and undermine the Imperium's ancient ways. They whispered about prophecies of doom, of outsiders corrupting the Cathar spirit, and Kalen, the accidental consort, was now the living embodiment of their worst fears. Princess Lyra, however, remained a fascinating enigma. She continued to treat Kalen with a blend of professional courtesy and a strange, almost affectionate amusement. During their private moments, often spent in her sprawling xenobotanical gardens, she would offer subtle warnings. The roots of ancient trees run deep, Envoy, she once mused, carefully tending to a shimmering, bioluminescent vine. And some prefer the darkness of the earth to the light of the sun. Kalen understood her meaning. She spoke of Thrak and his faction. Another time, while showing him a complex Cathar star chart, she pointed to a constellation of distant warring systems. Unity is strength, she clicked softly, but unity can be fragile when there are those who seek to fracture it. From within, she never explicitly named Thrak, but her meaning was clear. She was using their engagement, however accidental, as a shield, a strategic move to consolidate her own power and push through the alliance. Kalen was not just her accidental fiancé. He was a political tool, and a very vulnerable one at that. He began to see the true depth of the political game being played. Lyra was brilliant, but she was also in a precarious position, and his presence, while advantageous for her, also made him a target. The whispers of dissent grew louder. Kalen overheard fragments of conversations translated by his comlink, discussing ancient Cathar laws, forgotten rituals, and the true path of the Imperium. He learned that Thrak was not merely grumbling. He was actively gathering support, appealing to the most traditional and xenophobic elements of Cathar society. Thrak began to openly question the legitimacy of Kellen's proposal, suggesting that it was a trick, a human deception, or even a magical compulsion, rather than a genuine act of Cathar courtship. He cited obscure clauses in the ancient Cathar marriage pacts, hinting that the engagement could be annulled if it was proven to be based on untrue intent. The tension in the court became palpable, a heavy silence that often fell whenever Kalen entered a room. The Cathar, usually so boisterous, now seemed to hold their breath. Kalen felt eyes on him constantly, not just from Thrak's faction, but from neutral parties, assessing him, judging him. He realized that Thrak was building a case, meticulously gathering evidence, twisting every one of Kellen's innocent missteps into proof of his unworthiness. The prenuptial celebrations, once a source of comedic bewilderment, now felt like a performance on a stage, with a hostile audience waiting for him to stumble. He was no longer just a diplomat. He was a symbol, a challenge to Cathar tradition, and a target. He knew with a chilling certainty that Thrak was preparing a formal challenge, a public accusation that would force the issue. The fate of the alliance, and perhaps his own life, now hung precariously on his ability to navigate this treacherous alien court, where a simple misunderstanding could ignite an intergalactic war. The suspense tightened around him like a noose, and he knew deep in his gut that the calm before the storm was about to break. The chilling certainty Kalen Vance had felt now materialized in the grand Cathar Assembly Hall. Thrak, his obsidian scales gleaming under the hall's pulsating lights, stood before the High Council, his multi-limbed posture radiating triumph. "The human, Kalen Vance," Thrak boomed, his voice echoing with calculated disdain, "has sullied the sacred bonds of Cathar courtship with deceit and misunderstanding. I demand a trial of intent." A collective murmur rippled through the hundreds of Cathar dignitaries, their many eyes turning towards Kalen, who stood beside Princess Lyra, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. Lyra, though outwardly serene, subtly shifted one of her lower limbs, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture that Kalen, now attuned to her nuances, recognized as a warning. The High Council, ancient and unyielding, conferred briefly before their eldest member, a Cathar with scales like polished jade, announced, "The challenge is accepted. The trial of intent shall commence." Kellen's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't just about his personal embarrassment anymore. It was a public spectacle, a test of humanity's worth in the eyes of an ancient empire, and a direct threat to the vital alliance. The first challenge was the Labyrinth of Echoes, a vast, dark chamber designed to disorient and test navigation. Skills. Cathar warriors, with their multiple limbs and innate sense of direction, typically completed it swiftly. Kalen, relying solely on his 2 legs and human vision, felt a wave of dread. The air was thick with confusing sonic pulses, designed to scramble spatial awareness. He stumbled, his hand brushing against cold, slick walls. Panic threatened to rise, but then he remembered Lyra's earlier, seemingly casual, comment about the Cathar as reliance on harmonic resonance for navigation. He closed his eyes, focusing not on the disorienting echoes, but on the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in air pressure caused by the sound waves. He moved slowly, deliberately, using his human hearing to detect the faint disruptions in the pattern, mapping the unseen walls and turns. He wasn't as fast as a Cathar, but he was precise. When he finally emerged, blinking into the light, he was exhausted but triumphant. A few Cathar in the audience chirped in surprise, and even Thrak's scowl seemed to deepen with a flicker of annoyance. Next came the riddle of the Star Weaver, a mental test of logic and philosophy. Kalen was presented with a complex Cathar, holographic projection, a swirling nebula of data points representing the Cathar understanding of the universe. He was asked to identify the unseen thread that binds all existence. Cathar scholars typically offered intricate, multi-layered answers rooted in their ancient cosmology. Kalen, however, remembered Lyra's quiet observation that the simplest truths are often the most profound. He studied the nebula, not for its complexity, but for its patterns. He saw the connections, the flow of energy, the way disparate elements formed a cohesive whole. After a long silence that stretched the tension in the hall, Kalen spoke, his voice clear and steady. "The unseen thread," he declared, "is change. The constant, inevitable transformation that connects all moments, all beings, and all realities." A ripple of murmurs, this time of genuine intrigue, spread through the Cathar. It was an answer so fundamentally human, so focused on flux rather than static order, that it caught them off guard. Lyra's eyes, Kalen noticed, shimmered with a knowing approval. Thrak, however, looked as if he had tasted something bitter. The third and final challenge was the Pact of Shared Burden, a test of diplomatic skill and empathy. Kalen was placed in a simulated scenario. 2 Cathar clans were locked in a bitter dispute over water rights, their arguments escalating towards violence. Cathar tradition demanded a ruling based on strength and historical precedent, often leading to one clan's complete subjugation. Kalen, remembering his own human diplomatic training, chose a different path. He listened, truly listened, to both sides, not just for their demands, but for their underlying fears and needs. He spoke of compromise, of shared responsibility, of finding a solution that honored both clans' dignity rather than crushing one. He proposed a system of rotating access, combined with human-developed atmospheric moisture condensers to increase the overall water supply, a solution that was both practical and empathetic. He even shared a personal anecdote about a similar water dispute on Earth, showing his own vulnerability and the universal nature of such conflicts. This act of honorable vulnerability, a concept largely alien to the Stoic Cathar, resonated deeply with some of the elder council members. They had expected a show of force or clever legal maneuvering. Instead, they received genuine understanding. The clans in the simulation reluctantly but ultimately agreed to his terms. As Kalen completed the final challenge, a profound shift occurred within him. He was no longer just a bewildered human caught in an accidental engagement. He had faced their tests not by becoming Cathar, but by being authentically human, by leveraging the very qualities Thrak had dismissed as weaknesses: adaptability, empathy, and an unconventional approach to problem-solving. He had surprised them, and in doing so had earned a grudging respect from some, and a deeper, more dangerous animosity from Thrak. The conservative leader's face was a mask of barely contained fury. Kellen's unexpected successes had not only validated his accidental engagement in the eyes of many Cathar, but had also significantly strengthened Lyra's standing. Proving her choice, however unconventional, was strategically sound. The trial of intent was over, but Kalen knew with a fresh wave of suspense that the true battle for the Cathar Imperium and for his own future was only just beginning. Thrak would not let this go. The final confrontation was inevitable. The Cathar High Council chamber hummed with an almost unbearable tension, a silent, weighty anticipation that pressed down on Special Envoy Kalen Vance. This was it, the final act of the trial of intent, though it felt more like a trial of two civilizations. Thrak, Lyra's ambitious cousin, stood before the assembled elders, his multiple limbs gesturing with practiced authority, his voice a low, resonant rumble that filled the vast space. He spoke of ancient prophecies, of the sanctity of Cathar bloodlines, and of the inherent dangers of mingling with untested species. He painted a vivid picture of human unpredictability, twisting Kellen's accidental proposal into a calculated deception, a sign of humanity's manipulative nature. "This human," Thrak declared, his gaze sweeping over Kalen with disdain, "is a symbol of weakness, a foreign element that will corrupt our traditions and leave us vulnerable to the true threats of the galaxy." He appealed to their deepest fears, to the conservative core of Cathar society, arguing that the alliance with humanity was a reckless gamble, an insult to their ancestors, and that Lyra, by embracing it, was unfit to lead. The murmurs from the council grew, some in agreement, others in thoughtful silence. Kalen felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Thrak's words, though steeped in alien prejudice, were powerful, tapping into genuine concerns about change and the unknown. Then it was Kellen's turn. He stepped forward, taking a deep breath, acutely aware of every Cathar eye, every multifaceted gaze fixed upon him. He didn't try to refute Thrak's arguments point by point. He knew that wouldn't work. Instead, he spoke of something universal, something that transcended species and tradition. He spoke of the shared human desire for connection, for understanding, for growth. He acknowledged his initial blunder, the embarrassing accident that had brought him to this moment, but then he spoke of what he had learned since. He spoke of Lyra's brilliance, not just as a princess, but as a xenobotanist who saw beauty in every form of life, and as a leader who sought strength in unity, not isolation. He spoke of the lessons he had learned from the Cathar themselves during the trials, the resilience of the labyrinth, the profound wisdom in the Star Weaver's riddle, and the unexpected power of empathy in the pact of shared burden. He described humanity's own journey, fraught with mistakes and triumphs, and how they had learned that true strength often came not from rigid adherence to the past, but from the courage to embrace new perspectives. "We are not perfect," Kalen admitted, his voice resonating with a quiet sincerity, "but we are adaptable. We are curious, and we believe that the universe is vast enough for all of us to thrive together." He looked directly at Lyra, then back at the council. "My proposal, however accidental, has led me to understand a profound truth, that sometimes the most unlikely unions forge the strongest bonds." As Kalen finished, a different kind of silence fell over the chamber, one of consideration, not just judgment. It was Princess Lyra who then stepped forward, her scales shimmering with a newfound resolve. Her voice, usually soft and melodic, now carried an undeniable authority. "Honored Council," she began, her gaze unwavering as it met Thrax. "Envoy Vance has spoken with honesty. Now allow me to speak with truth." She then unveiled a series of meticulously gathered data logs, intercepted communications, and encrypted financial transactions. The holograms that flickered to life above the council table revealed a shocking truth. Thrak had been secretly negotiating with the Vorlag hegemony, a rival galactic power known for its aggressive expansion and ruthless tactics. He had been offering them Cathar vibranium secrets in exchange for their support in his bid for the throne, a move that would have plunged the Imperium into civil war and left it vulnerable to external conquest. The evidence was irrefutable, meticulously presented, and devastating. Thrak's face, usually so composed, contorted into a mask of pure fury and disbelief as his treachery was laid bare for all to see. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of enraged chirps and indignant trills. The Cathar, who valued honor and loyalty above all else, turned on Thrak with a swift collective condemnation. The conservative faction, once his staunch supporters, now recoiled from him in disgust. The High Council, their ancient faces grim, deliberated for only a brief moment. Their verdict was swift and unanimous. Thrak's challenge was dismissed, his actions condemned as treasonous. And then, with a solemnity that resonated through Kalen's very bones, the eldest council member turned to Lyra and Kalen. "The trial of intent," he announced, his voice booming, "has revealed not only the sincerity of the human envoy's heart, but also the true wisdom of Princess Lyra's vision. The union shall proceed. The alliance shall be forged." A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled Kellen's knees, washed over him. He had done it. He had survived. He had, against all odds, not only secured the alliance, but had also played an unwitting role in exposing a dangerous conspiracy within the Cathar Imperium. As the chamber filled with renewed, genuine ululations of celebration, Lyra turned to him, her many eyes sparkling with a warmth he hadn't seen before. She extended one of her delicate, multi-jointed hands, and Kalen, without hesitation, took it. Her grip was firm, surprisingly gentle. He still couldn't quite believe how Special Envoy Kalen Vance had stumbled into an accidental interstellar engagement. But as he looked at Princess Lyra, now his fiancée, and felt the weight of the Cathar Imperium's future and humanity's resting on this unlikely union, he realized something profound. What had begun as a colossal misunderstanding, a diplomatic, Gaff of epic proportions had blossomed into something truly extraordinary. It was a bridge between worlds, built on the most unexpected of foundations. A human's clumsy gesture, an alien princess's shrewd acceptance, and the shared, uncertain, but incredibly hopeful dawn of an unlikely union between two vastly different, yet equally determined species. The story of humanity and the Cathar had just begun, and Callan, the accidental consort, was at its very heart.